والعود دندن دنري والطبل طب طب طبري والله طب 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 طب
Assalamu
طب طب
alaikum. A
طبري.
very different lecture today. There is a song or there is a nasheed that is becoming very famous on TikTok and other places, and people have asked, what is the significance of this particular nasheed? Which the words that are becoming more famous are tab tabi tab tab tabi tab tab tabi tab tab tabali. So, and then let me give you a background story, and then probably that may help you understand that this particular poem is dated back to the time of Khalifa Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. In his time, the story goes like this, that if he could hear something 3 times, he would memorize it, he would remember it. And he had one slave girl, if she could hear something 2 times, she could remember it. And then he had a slave boy. If he could hear something once, he could remember it. So a person who could hear something once and remembers, another person, if he or she could hear something twice, would remember, and the Khalifa himself, if he hears something 3 times, would remember. And then, knowing that he possesses these kind of people in his court, he made an announcement that if any poem is written by a poet that pleases me, I will reward him so and so. So the poets, in the greed of getting a big reward, started writing these beautiful poetries and started coming in the court of the king. Every time a poet presents a poem, king would be like, well, I am already aware of this poem. In fact, I'm the one who wrote it. You didn't write it. So this is a copyright infringement, right? So the poet will be like, how's it possible? I spent so many hours writing this poem. And the Khalifa was like, no, this is my work. And if you want proof, I can prove it to you. Now, since the poet had already recited it once, what he would do, the Khalifa would do, he would make his 2 slaves, a boy and the girl who could hear things and memorize right away on the spot. He would make them stand behind the wall, and then he would order one of his slave boy to come over and said, okay, I want you to recite so-and-so poem of mine. So the slave who had heard it once would just recite the whole poem. And Khalifa would be like, see, if you had written it, how did my slave remember it? And then he's like, okay, you want more proof? Then he would ask that girl slave to come over, and now that she had heard it twice, once from the poet and once from the other slave, so she would also recite it. So the emperor was like, the Khalifa was like, see, 2 of my slave, how do they know your poem if you had written it? And then even I can recite my own poem to you, because now the Khalifa had heard it 3 times, 2 from his slaves and 1 from the poet himself, would recite the poem to the poet. And poet would be extremely disappointed. So many poets were getting disappointed. And there was a man by the name of Al-Asma'i. He ran across one of those poets, and he found him extremely upset. So he asked him, okay, what is it that upsets you? So he tells him the whole story, that I spent the entire night writing a poem. I went to the court of the king to get some reward, and what I got was an insult. The king said that this was his poem, and he proved me wrong by bringing 3 evidences, 3 people who recited my poem, and I had no answer, even though it was my work. How is it possible that my work was leaked overnight when I was the only one who was aware of this work? And I am extremely disappointed. So Asma'i then said, okay, I will work with it. So he wrote this poem that had tongue twisters, that would bother the mind, very difficult for anybody to remember upon hearing it the first time. And then he walks into the king's court. And he says to the king, King, I have a poem that I've written for you so that I may deserve a reward from you. So the king made the similar arrangement. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he made both of the slaves stand behind the wall where Asma'i couldn't see them. And now Asma'i starts reciting the poem. ده صوت صفير البلبل هيج قلب الثمل الماء والظهر معا مع ظهر اللحظ المقل وأنت يا سيد لي وسيدي وموللي فكم تيمني غزيل العقيقل قطفته من وجنة من لثم ورد الخجل فقال لا 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 وقد غدا مهرولي وخذوا مال الطرب من فعل هذا الرجل فولولت وولولت ولي ويل لي فقلت لا تولولي وبين اللؤلؤ لي قالت له حين كذا انهض وجد بالنقل وفتية سقونني قهوة كالعسل لي شممتها بأنفي أزكى من القرنفل في وسط بستان حلي بالذهر والسرور لي والعود دندن لي والطبل طبطب لي طبطبي 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 طبطب لي والسقف سق لي والرقص قد طاب لي شوى شوى وشاهش على ورق سفرجلي. And then it just goes on, it's a long poem. You probably are thinking, what am I telling you? Then it just goes on, and in the end, it just finishes it like أقول في مطلعها صوت السفير البلبلي. So this is how it all ends. But anyway, when he's done with this poem, which is so difficult to remember, King orders his slave boy to come forward, and then King makes a claim that whatever it is, I think I've heard it before. So he calls his slave boy over and asks him to recite this poem to Asma'i, and the slave boy starts it, but trembles over and makes a lot of mistakes because it was very difficult to remember. And King is like, maybe he's having a difficult time. Let me ask another of my slave person to come over and recite that to you. But since she also did not hear it completely 2 times, she also struggles. And then King, since he did not hear it 3 times, he also struggles. So this whole competition comes to an end, and the king is extremely disappointed at the work of Asma'i. So this is the story behind the poem. And of course, people have explored it to find it extremely interesting, especially the place where it just goes والعود دندن لي والطبل طبطب لي طبطبي 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 طبطب لي. This is basically the story that goes behind this. Allah knows best, but I think this poem was written hundreds of years, probably 1300 years ago. At least it's attributed to those times. And it was recently recited by some Arab person, and now it has started picking up. Anyway, Allah knows best. So that's the story behind this. And then, of course, there is a meaning behind all of these words. These words are not just random words. It is basically Sawtu Safir al-Bulbuli. It is basically the sound of the whistling bulbul. I hope that helps for those of you who are wondering what it is. Assalamu alaikum.